All right, hello and welcome to Office Hours, where we answer questions, give philosophical perspectives, formulate and explore arguments, and deep dive into particular topics of your choice. Ian has asked for a review of the interview between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. I've been seeing a lot more of Nick Fuentes recently. It feels like he's beginning to go mainstream, which was what I predicted after the death of Charlie Kirk. It seemed like there was no one who had the energy. And I told this to several people, like Nick Fuentes is the next in line, really. And that seems to be exactly what we're seeing now. So Nick Fuentes is going mainstream. He's becoming the next big, young, conservative voice in politics. Now, there's an amusing context to this interview. For those of you who aren't aware of who Nick Fuentes is, which if you're following me, that's odds are low to zero. But maybe you haven't been following the drama on the internet. The last couple months has been a lot of Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson accusing each other of being feds. So the fact that they're sitting down to have this, what wound up being a very amicable, very pleasant discussion, is both very amusing and like awkward, but also kind of endearing. Like it's cool to see people be able to like come through this like Three Stooges, Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man, you're a Fed and you're a Fed, and actually talk about some issues, although they didn't talk as much about issues as it was a sort of, this felt like the initiation. It felt like the christening of Nick Fuentes as a mainstream media character. And it felt like that, I think, because the conversation was less about politics and it was more about Nick Fuentes. Who is this young man? What is his background? Where did he come from? The interview was mostly about Nick. It wasn't Carlson asking him his opinions, although, I mean, that came up because Nick Fuentes, for most people, is his opinions in a large way. But it was really about Nick Fuentes. Who is this guy? And the answer to that is apparently not a Fed, unless they're both Feds. Maybe we're Feds too. The short answer is he's a college kid, college dropout, who has loved politics since he was a teenager. And he's a self-described weirdo, not necessarily in the interview, but elsewhere. He is a disillusioned libertarian, and he loves America. And he is famous because he was asking really before anybody else in an intelligent way. He was the guy who was asking, why is our relationship so weird with Israel? And what seems to be revealed, the big story of this interview was really the story of Ben Shapiro's attempted murder of Nick Fuentes. I don't mean murder in a literal sense, although that appears to have happened, but murder in the sense of killing him as a media figure, strangling him in the crib, to borrow from Carlson's language. And if you have heard bad things about Nick, about him being an anti-Semite, about just a horrific racist and misogynist and all this stuff, there's a good chance that is, you think that because of this campaign to take him out, which didn't work. Now, that's not to say that Nick Fuentes hasn't brought a little bit of this on himself. As mentioned in the Candace Owens interview, which I talked about before as well, He straight up introduced himself as a racist. Now, it's to a Gen X audience, certainly to a Boomer audience. Actually, take Gen X out of it, as tradition requires. To a Boomer audience and to a Millennial audience, this is like horrific. You claim to be a racist? Oh my God! You just call yourself a bad person. Why don't you? But to Gen Z, this seems to be different. He, for so many decades, the allegation of racism has been used to silence people, even when it's clearly unwarranted and wrong. Usually when it's unwarranted and wrong. That it seems that Gen Z has made a comedy bit out of annoying those people, the people who want to shut you down. And they do that by playing into the stereotypes. If you're going to use, false allegations of racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, imperialism, whatever, Islamophobia, then Gen Z and younger millennials are happy to just accept the label, even if they don't actually believe it, just to piss you off, because they live in a generation where everybody knows this is fake. Everybody understands that, like, 99% of the time, racism isn't real. The charge of racism is fake. The charge of racism is a magic spell that some liberal Karen is trying to invoke to get you in trouble and to control you. And so they don't take it seriously among themselves, so they're happy to lean into it just to spite and piss off the controlling Karens, the nurse marms who want to police everybody's morality, like a particularly embarrassing kind of what are the moral police called in Saudi Arabia? Anyways, we don't need to get into that. And I think that humor comes into clearer focus when we look at this Tucker Carlson interview, where they both spent a great deal of time, well, not time, but devoted a fair bit of energy, they were very emphatic about this, to decrying genuine racial hatred. And even Nick Fuentes said that. Like, he's known for this like kind of meme language and his brand of like lean into the extremes comedy. But in the last month or two, I think he sensed that his time has come, because he started telling guys like, whoa, guys, dial it back. And he straight up advises people, like, don't tell people you're a groyper. Like, don't stand up for me if it hurts your life. Like, just believe the right things, put yourself in a strong position, do well. And then, like, listen to me because I think I have a good position, he would say. So he's not, he's not a meme lord, burn it all down guy when push comes to shove. I think he's had his moments of saying things for the lulz. But that's not really what he's about. But the Christianity question, which was a big part of this Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes conversation, and I think it's a really retrospectively, it's a big factor in the relationship between Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk as well, because they had very little in common. They didn't actually agree on a lot, but at the end of the day, their mutual respect, the thing that brought them together, was Christianity. That was not the only thing keeping them on the same side, but it was like a big part of it. But when Christianity gets invoked in this Nick Fuentes Tucker Carlson interview, they're talking about opposing hatred. So I might have written a book about this somewhere. They're talking about the Jews having special protection as a witness people. It's a very strange thing to hear Nick Fuentes, of all people, say. And there's a theological binding to this concept of the individual as at odds with the nation. Now, some of us might say, you can't be an individual without a context. You can't be an individual outside of the context of a nation, of a group with a set of values within which an individual might excel or be deficient, relative to the various virtues held by that honor group. Without a single honor group, without a single standard, it's not that you only have individuals, you don't even have individuals, because there's no standing, there's nothing for the individual to exist in relation to, if that makes sense. This is kind of abstract, but I think it's important, and I think it's an opinion that many people hold tacitly, and they sort of gloss this over on the sort of general assumption that a single cultural standard could be universalizable, but it's not. And that's really what we've learned in the last 60 years or so, because we have had a what Dugan would call a monopolar world. We had, or what Fukuyama would call the end of history, or Hegel, I suppose. And it just flattened everything. You don't even have individuals in such a context. You just have fungible economic units, because there's no the grander objective order doesn't care about the individuals. The individual is not a full person to this order, except in a sort of moralistic, abstract kind of way. Like, they'll talk about it that way, but they don't act with care towards this individual. Whereas a society with an aesthetic ideal, with a set of standards, does. So, and maybe Nick Fuentes in his Catholicism might disagree and say, no, there is a universal Catholic, culture that values the individual as an individual, but there are problems with the and conflict between that universal standard and the nationalism that Nick Fuentes wants to support, because Nick Fuentes is America first, right? Not Catholicism first, not Christianity first. I remember reading somewhere that you cannot serve two masters, because you will love one and hate the other, or despise one and embrace the other, or something to that effect. My verbiage might not be correct. But it was interesting listening to Nick Fuentes, who is most famous for his criticisms of Israel, predating everyone else, at least the serious people, seem to, I don't want to say cuck, because he doesn't, but to go very, very soft and to get softer on the question the more that Christianity dominates the discussion. And I think there are theological reasons for that. And I think Tucker Carlson really emphasized that by bringing up his own Christianity and his own opposition to hatred, and which Nick Fuentes mirrored. So I would like, if I could, to read a passage at length from Holy Nihilism, which is my book, The Moral and Spiritual Case Against Christianity, on Christianity and nationalism, Christianity and national identity and patriotism, specifically on the question of immigration. The evangelical obligation within Christianity compels an openness, not only to one's own people going abroad to religiously conquer others, but also to other people coming in, if such a movement might allow for the saving of souls. Based upon the clearly apathetic views of Jesus towards this world, including its governments, culture, institutions, and values, and the even more explicit and precise indifference articulated by Augustine, on what grounds can the Christian object to such movements of people? I have personally heard pastors welcome the advent of large-scale immigration precisely because it makes evangelism easier. To the Christian, the important identity of the foreigner is not their nationality, their culture, or even their present religious loyalty, but their relation to the one God as his unique creation, alike in this regard to all other humans. Quote, "You are to distribute this land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. You are to allot it as an inheritance for yourself and for the foreigners residing among you, and who have children. You are to consider them as native-born Israelites. Along with you, they are to be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. In whatever tribe a foreigner resides, there you are to give them their inheritance, declares the sovereign Lord." Ezekiel 47, 21 through 23. Whatever the effects may be on the souls of the hitherto unevangelized, the effects of rapid, large-scale migration are always negative, at least for the host population. I'm going to skip the economic stuff. It is pointless to morally condemn invading populations for moving to another place. People have always moved. Sometimes entire nations move to flee from a more serious threat. The moral fault is not with the guest population moving, but with the host population refusing to protect its own interests. No one would call a cougar immoral for chasing a deer, but there would be something truly wrong if the deer did not run or fight to save its life. But again, and it is worth repeating, of what value would life be to a deer who is promised immortality in exchange for loving his predator? I am understating the problem, because the connection between Christianity and large-scale migration is not merely one of permission. Rather, it is the heart of Christian identity which created the problem. In pre-Christian times and in culturally unchristian cultures, it was both intuitive and natural to look after one's own people first. Almost every past culture held a traditional obligation to hospitality and care for travelers passing through, but that hospitality had its limits, especially if the guest had the audacity to declare that he was staying for good. But Christianity destroys this distinction between us and them, between neighbor and foreigner. By complete identification in the Spirit of God, all distinctions between nations and peoples break down. What, after all, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, if not an evasion from the very important distinction between neighbor and not neighbor? Now, this is obviously a passage of a much longer book, which I encourage everyone to go out and buy and read if you are intrigued. But the basis of my understanding of Christianity comes from the greatest commandment. I believe that you can read the entire Bible through the lens of this passage, and it makes everything clear. And the passage is in Matthew 22:36 or something like that. It's basically where a man comes to Jesus and says, Jesus, what is the greatest teacher? What is the greatest commandment? And Jesus replies by saying, the greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. And the second is like it. He very needlessly adds a second, strangely. Second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. Is that like love the Lord your God? It is a paradox, because, and not a contradiction, I'm trying to be clear, but it's a paradox because love requires attention. Love is not some Buddhist, just general positive vibes to people. It is attention given to the object of love. And if you love something with all your mind, all your heart, all your strength, with everything you have, then there is nothing left to love other people with. So how is it that you love other people as yourself if you are loving God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. How do you love yourself? Indeed, there's another passage in Luke that says, yea, you are to hate your own life. So this gets complicated. But there's an answer to this. There's an answer to this puzzle, to this conundrum, and that is the doctrine of the Imago Dei, of the doctrine of the divine image, that we are created in the image of God. God is hidden from us. We cannot see him. We cannot feel him if you're like most people, but we can see his creation. It is difficult for us to love him directly because we cannot see him, but we see his likeness in other people. And this is maybe one of the reasons why Jesus says that whenever 2 or more of you are gathered in my name, I am there with you, because he resides in the body of the church. He resides in his creation. His mark is in humanity itself. We love God by loving other people. Now, that creates an interesting conundrum of its own, because we are all equal as possessors of this divine image. Your family is not more godly than anyone else's family, intrinsically. Americans are not greater in their possession of the divine image than Somalis, or Mexicans, or Russians, or Ukrainians, or whomever. No one who is human, we can't assume, anyways, maybe Calvinists have a different opinion, but we have no reason to assume, or to assume that we have the knowledge to know if some people are more godly than others and more deserving of the absolute, complete, total, all-consuming love we are to pour out of our hearts into the world than anybody else. This obligation, the greatest commandment upon which all the rest of the law rests, leaves no room for family distinctions and national distinctions. Indeed, we see Jesus telling his disciples to leave their families behind, let the dead bury the dead, to hate your father and your mother, yea, and even your own life. It is at its deep roots, and I'm going to piss Christians off when I say this, but I sincerely believe it's true, and I think I'm theologically correct. Christianity is anti-family. The family is an idol. And it doesn't mean you can't have a family. It doesn't mean you don't care about your family. You do. Of course you care about your family. Even the pagans care for their families. So, of course, you should do at least that. But you are called to do so much more than just care for your family, to care for your own nation. And if you are concerned about the welfare of your family, where is your faith? Do you think God is not powerful enough to protect what is important? And if you are harmed or die, but are under the grace of God, what true harm can befall you? Is that the lesson of all the martyrs of the early church? No. No, it's about your soul. It's about your relationship to God, and all of these earthly concerns about safety and quality of life and all this other stuff. Those are earthly concerns. That's not Jesus. That's not Augustine. That's not the desert fathers renouncing every beautiful thing in favor of a frickin' tomb to sit in and pray. Not that everyone should live as desert fathers. No Christian says everyone should live as they do. But there's a spiritual truth in there about where we place our care. And when you get down to the heart of Christianity, it is opposed to nationalism. It's even opposed to the family, really, when you get down to it. But the nation is Caesar. The nation is the world. The nation is the flesh. All of the things that the Christian, the believing Christian, is supposed to die from, and to be reborn into the Spirit, which comes and goes, and no one knows where. I forget the exact passage that Jesus uses to describe the manner of movement of the Spirit, like the free movement of peoples. Now, I am sure I'm going to hear all the people who say, "Oh, look at the Orthodox, the tradition, man, the tradition." When people use tradition selectively to protect a notion of their religion as they want it to be, in the face of clear text which says the opposite, from Jesus himself, then there's a question of like, are you trying to be Christian, or are you trying to use Christianity for politics? And when I see Nick Fuentes, he's clearly wrestling with this. Like, he looks uncomfortable to me. And I think many of these Christians are when they're facing these struggles. I think he's taking the matter seriously. Most of the Christians who come to me with outrage and indignation are like, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." I think the majority of them are not taking the problem seriously enough. I think they are trying to use Christianity as a political tool. And the problem with that, of course, is that you end up in a situation with you end up pushing people like Nick Fuentes to the top, who do believe what they say, who are serious people, and the deeper they get into Christianity, the more they turn into pro-immigration people, because the theology matters. It turns out this is not an infinitely malleable social identity that you can, mold it into whatever you think is convenient. This thing, Christianity, has a nature of its own, and the more you push it, the more serious people are going to be taken seriously, and the heart of the faith itself will express itself more completely. And that looks a lot different now when everyone can actually read the text than it would have looked in like the 12th century, or when 11th century, when we get our crusades and you get this Norman Viking ethos that is defining Christian Europe. It's like, oh yeah, well, a lot like Christian Africa and Christian Middle East and all these other parts of the Christian world that were nothing like Europe, So anyways, a long digression, but I think a relevant one, because I think that the bit on Christianity and hatred and the need to disavow hatred was kind of a defining moment of this interview that was otherwise just kind of a biography of who Nick Fuentes is and the trials he's been through. And it was extraordinary. Like, he's been through a lot. So overall, I found the Carlson interview with Nick to be interesting and good. It's fun to see Nick becoming mainstream. And it's especially fun to see him after you see someone so young survive such a professional media hit job and thrive in the face of it. It's a glimmer of hope. But it is a little depressing to see Christianity becoming a central point again when our problems are primarily, immigration, criminal justice, and our weird relationship with Israel. And Christianity is at the root of all three of those. Our ideas of restorative justice and rehabilitation and all that, that's Christian in its origin. Our problems with immigration, our need to take in the sick and the poor and care for the weak of the world, that is the Sermon on the Mount. Our weird relationship with Israel, we don't even need to explain that. It is, but it's just Christianity at work there. What I wish was that, obviously we need a mythic foundation. We need a story of what our civilization, what our culture is a part of. And I really wish it could become more mainstream and more tolerable to say, the Bible's fine. It's It's interesting. It was an extraordinary religion, Christianity was, but they took this idea of heroism too far. They took the Iliad too far without the Odyssey. And while it did some good stuff, the emphasis on forgiveness, you could do a lot worse than that, you know? Love your neighbor as yourself is great. I wish we were a little less ambiguous about who our neighbor is, you know? But, you know, there are good things in Christianity, but I wish it could be acceptable in politics and public to say, you know what? We can step back a little bit. We can go back to Homer and Plato and Aristotle. We have not just as good, but much better theology and philosophy in Homer and Plato. We have better, we have a more real political science in Aristotle. You know, and I think it would emphasize our problems a little bit better, because I don't think our biggest problems are immigration and criminal justice and our weird relationship with Israel. Like those are the biggest symptoms. But we have a problem of corruption with power that we haven't wrapped our head around, and no one addressed this better than Plato, I don't think. And Christianity doesn't really have an answer to that. It just says, oh, some people are just kind of chosen by God, and we have this sort of vox populi, vox dei, sanction for those who are elected, without a sophisticated understanding of the corruption that can come along with that. I think that's actually something that we had in Greek spiritual thinking and philosophy that Christianity kind of lost along the way. And I think the corruption that is aided by Christianity, but which is, succeeds because it's lucrative and whatever else with immigration and our criminal justice problems. I think it's a problem of corruption, and the Christian focus. We just need to pray. Or I was on a conversation earlier tonight. Someone said, maybe the thing to do is to weep for the state of the world, because Jesus wept. I don't know about that. So, and I don't see any serious conflicts of interest with the state of Greece in its current state, at least not in the near future. So that's my wish. Still, great interview. I think people should watch it. It wasn't like groundbreaking or anything, but I think Tucker Carlson was doing a good job, and it's cool to see broken bridges mended and connections remade, even if we don't have necessarily an attachment to either person involved. It's cool to see reconnections made, conversations happening again, and I'll be really excited if we see not just conversations between fractured elements of the right, but conversations across the aisle with members of the left as soon as they pick people who can actually defend themselves. Maybe we already have that to some degree with like RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and people like that, but it's a sign of hope of sorts. So anyways, that's my opinion on this interview. I'll leave a link in the description below. I do recommend you watch it. It's very good. It's a very good overview of who Nick Fuentes is, but I really think the Christianity thing is the big part, and the contradiction between Nick's general politics and his theology is, I think, the most interesting thing about him. And I think he is exceptionally smart. He's certainly smarter than me. And I would be curious what his answer would be to that conflict. So that's my feeling about it. Anyways, so thanks for listening, and take care.